Another phenomena of midsummer snow took place in Gansu Province of China, which is now being hit as well by floods and landslides. A former CIA agent, Alexander Yuqing Ma, has been arrested and charged with espionage for allegedly conspiring to spy for the CCP. And the head of the China Banking Regulatory Commission, meanwhile, is warning of a potential global financial crisis, and that includes a looming internal crisis in China caused by bad loans. Welcome back, everyone. First off, some breaking news. The natural disasters in China aren't showing signs of stopping. The fourth flood wave on the Yangtze River is still ongoing, flooding towns and cities along its path. On August 18th, the Yangtze River Water Resources Commission announced that a fifth flood wave has formed at the upper reaches of the Yangtze River, and flood warnings have been issued on level 2. Among the areas being hit already is Gansu Province and the upper reaches of that river. On August 17th, a large mudslide occurred in the village of Wen County in that province. Debris flow rushed into the Baishui River, forming a landslide dam, and the locals had to blast that dam to release the floods. When they blasted it, the water poured into nearby villages. In Shui Moguo village, the floods reached 3 stories high, and many wooden houses collapsed. Now, the country is also experiencing power outages. More than 1,300 people have been evacuated, but many people in 11 villages were unable to evacuate in time and were trapped on their rooftops. Meanwhile, there has been more summer snow in China, midsummer snow. It's a phenomenon considered deeply symbolic in Chinese folklore, representing an injustice having taken place. In Gansu Province again, which was hit again by heavy rains and mudslides over the past few days, blizzards suddenly began overnight in 2 of the counties, where it turned cold as winter despite the midsummer heat. Now, given the symbolic nature of this, Chinese netizens made statements including, quote, "Heaven is sending a message," and, quote, "Now I'm scared." On July 30th and August 6th, the rare sight of summer snow also appeared in different parts of Beijing. In Hong Kong, meanwhile, top officials are now admitting that the U.S. sanctions are having their effects. In an interview with the CCP mouthpiece news outlet CGTN, the chief executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, admitted for the first time that she may be restricted in using financial services and credit cards provided by American companies. And Hong Kong Police Commissioner Chris Tong told the Hong Kong Economic Times that some banks have suspended services to him as well. Now, after the sanctions took effect, some countries also stopped selling supplies to the Hong Kong police force and also stopped some training activities with Hong Kong. Now, U.S. sanctions are placed on officials who were involved in effectively ending the CCP's former agreement of autonomy for Hong Kong. In mainland China, meanwhile, the CCP has expelled an outspoken retired professor over her criticisms of the regime. Former Central Party school professor Kai Xia was stripped of her pension after making comments deemed by the CCP as having, quote, serious political problems. What did she do? She called the Chinese regime a political zombie and said the political shell of the CCP must be thrown away. Now, after the death of CCP virus whistleblower Li Wenliang, Kai Xia participated in a petition campaign requesting freedom of speech. She also said the CCP is forcing its national security laws onto Hong Kong, and this is equivalent to, quote, raping the Hong Kong people. Meanwhile, a former CIA agent has been arrested and charged with espionage for allegedly conspiring to spy for the CCP. Now, the former CIA agent, Alexander Yuqing Ma, was arrested on August 14th and was a naturalized U.S. citizen who was born in Hong Kong. Now, in response to the arrest, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian told reporters on August 18 that he didn't understand the situation and then accused the United States of smearing China. Now, commenting on the arrest as well, Alan Kohler Jr., the assistant director of the FBI's counterintelligence division, said in a release that, quote, "This serious act of espionage is another example in a long string of illicit activities that the People's Republic of China is conducting within and against the United States." And more on the United States. Within a space of about 72 hours since August 13th, 52 people were shot in New York City, where the NYPD has recorded a 220% increase in shootings since this time last year. In response to this, President Donald Trump sent a tweet to Mayor Bill de Blasio stating, quote, "Law and order. If NYC mayor can't do it, we will." Now, the Trump administration has been sending federal marshals to major U.S. cities to help quell the riots and violence. And starting this week, meanwhile, U.S. states are set to roll out a weekly unemployment boost of $300. This will be distributed by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. The move was approved by Trump in early August. And in Seattle, 18 people were arrested in riots around a march against the police union there, and several officers were left injured. Now, the crowd set off a large explosion, then tried smashing a window of a police vehicle before officers issued orders for them to disperse. The rioters responded to this by throwing rocks, bottles, and another explosive device at the officers. Several officers were injured in that explosion. Now, the group behind the march was the Youth Liberation Front Seattle Division, which is linked to the far-left Antifa network. And meanwhile, Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and senior advisor to U.S. President Donald Trump, told reporters in a call on August 17th that the issues between Israel and Palestine may be resolved, quote, at some point. And in world news related to this, Israel and the United Arab Emirates now have a peace deal. This will make it the third Arab country to normalize relations with Israel. This is following Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994. It's also the first of the 6 Arab Gulf states to do so, and others are expected to follow. Now, the peace deal was allegedly done to the surprise of the UAE's neighbors, and Palestine declared it a stab in the back. In South Korea, meanwhile, a new outbreak of the novel coronavirus, a CCP virus, has allegedly been linked to a large church in Seoul. According to Time, initial tests of 2,500 of the church's 4,000 members revealed 246 new cases of the virus on Tuesday. This raises the total number of viruses in the country over the last 5 days to 959. And in North Korea, citizens are being ordered to hand over dogs that represent capitalist, quote, decadence. Now, reports say North Korean leader Kim Jong-un banned pet ownership in July when he declared it was a, quote, tainted trend by bourgeois ideology. They identified more recently homes with pet dogs and ordered them to surrender the dogs or have them taken by force. The dogs are either being sent to state-run zoos or are being sold to restaurants for meat. And in Kiribati, a country in the Central Pacific Ocean, an image of the Chinese ambassador has gone viral, showing him walking over the backs of locals. Now, the country's Minister for Environment said it was a way of showing respect and love for a visitor. But reports show there was mixed reaction from locals. Some said it was a display of the country's culture. Others say it was an embarrassment. Now, as a bit of context to this, Kiribati cut ties with Taiwan in September and began shifting towards the Chinese Communist Party. That was after the Chinese regime made a $730 million push to win over Taiwan's allies in that region. And now for the broader stories for today. First off, the CCP is taking steps to double down on its communist system. In a recent article, Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, said, quote, "The foundation of China's political economy can only be a Marxist political economy and not based on other economic theories." And he added that, quote, "The dominant position of public ownership cannot be shaken and the leading role of the state-owned economy cannot be shaken." Now, some Western analysts appear to be backing Xi's position. Some refer to it as China's system of state capitalism, and others are promoting the China model for managing economies. Now, Xi stated his stance that the foundation of China's economy can only be a Marxist political economy. Now, what does this mean for the economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping? Now, a bit of history on this. The Chinese Communist Party basically controlled just about every industry in the country. Most of it was military-run. Deng Xiaoping, who was a few leaders back, was the one who changed this during his reform and opening up period. It was right before Jiang Zemin, right ahead of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Now, what that did was he changed it so China went from having a purely military-run business system, essentially, to one that had a semi-public system. So people can start businesses. If you grow to a certain extent, the Chinese Communist Party can take it over, or at the very least install different types of liaisons within your company. Now, what are they doing now? The system of public ownership, as Xi called it, and the state-owned economy. Now, when Xi talks about this Marxist political economy, does that mean he's moving back before the days of Deng Xiaoping, or does it mean he's talking about sustaining the CCP's current model of state capitalism, what Lenin referred to as the word for socialism? Now, when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, they refer to their system as socialism with Chinese characteristic. And Xi's now talking about public ownership and the state-owned economy. What does this mean? Very likely, it either means he's going to be doubling down on the socialist/communist system, or he's going to be moving it back to a system prior to what we saw during Deng Xiaoping, meaning the CCP may be revitalizing some of the same deep communist systems that existed previously. Now, the CCP has also banned a new list of books. Included among them is Reflections on the French Revolution by Xi Wang, along with the entire series of the Western Conservative Classics translation series. Now, this was seen as a warning shot that the Chinese Communist Party is repeating much of what was done during the French Revolution. And if we understand what happened during that time, it's not far-fetched, actually. Under the French Revolution, they had, for example, the law of suspects, where those who accused the regime were themselves accused. If you, say, criticize the ruling party at that time, you could be beheaded at the guillotine. Under the Chinese Communist Party, they have very similar systems, where if you criticize the CCP, you face arrest. They had during the French Revolution the de-Christianization movement. This was a movement to destroy Christianity and Catholicism. And right now in China, we see the same things taking place, where all religions, including Christianity, are under assault by the Chinese Communist Party. And we also saw during the French Revolution the cult of reason, which was the first state-run system of atheism. The Chinese Communist Party is also an atheist-based system, and questioning that, going against it, can also get you imprisoned. There are many different political prisoners in China who are imprisoned solely based on their belief, among them Falun Gong practitioners and Muslim Uyghurs. And so what are we seeing here overall? The Chinese Communist Party appears to be doubling down on the communist system, and it's even banning books that could raise awareness, that give historical insight into the things it's currently doing. It's showing signs right now of closing to the outside world, and also starting programs again to try and reinvigorate its communist system. Now, we talked previously about some of the proposals from the hardliners within the CCP. One of the big proposals right now is they say China is facing too much pressure externally and internally. They believe the only hope of saving the CCP, of sustaining the communist system, is to close off China from the outside world and basically restart the whole Cultural Revolution all over again, to reinvigorate the CCP's control over the country. And this does appear to be the pattern of these changes and where they do appear to be heading. Now, in other news on the Chinese Communist Party's use of subversion to undermine open systems, a former professor at Oxford University is receiving attention right now for awarding a special title to a Hong Kong businessman, Chongqing Wai, who was an advisor to the CCP's National People's Congress, among other titles. Now, according to The Guardian, this professor, Alan Hudson, said the reason for his granting this award was to get a possible donation to the university or to his department, and the action is now being called out for opening up the university to influence from the Chinese Communist Party. Now, Hudson also received awards from China. It's common for the CCP to win over academics using methods like this. Now, this ties into the broader picture of how the Chinese Communist Party recruits people to its system. This does not necessarily mean it's recruited them as spies, but winning them over on various tiers. This is how they do it. Now, in the West, when they talk about the motivations for engaging in espionage, they use the acronym MICE. That's money, ideology, creed, and ego. But the Chinese Communist Party, the recruitment system is different. They look at moral weaknesses and how to exploit those moral weaknesses, the main ones being lust, power, greed, or fame. When it comes to how they oftentimes will exploit academics, they often use fame. Now imagine, for example, you're an academic, you've written all these in-depth research papers, you've dedicated your life to researching a topic, and nobody reads your papers, nobody gives you any credit for what you've done. And then suddenly you get an invite in the mail. Chinese Communist Party, or say one of its universities, maybe not the CCP itself, wants to invite you to China, and they say your research is fantastic, it's amazing, and Chinese students want to hear everything you have to say. You go there and they literally roll out a red carpet for you. You go in there, you get 5-star treatment, you get asked very intelligent questions by these students. Then they start asking you questions like this. You're so smart, you're so great, why is it that people like you are in America and they criticize the Communist Party. Why is it that America fears the rise of the Chinese Communist Party? Why is it that more academics are not as smart as you when it comes to understanding China? This will feed the individual's ego and at the same time begin subverting them, making them side with the CCP in terms of their views on China and in terms of international views on how the CCP is interpreted. This is one of the methods the Chinese Communist Party uses when it comes to subverting the academic community. You'll find a lot of individuals, a lot of academics who are more favorable to the CCP have gone to China and done these speaking events or received awards of different types. This is one of the main methods they use. And now the broader issue with this as well is how the Chinese Communist Party is subverting universities, not just in the US, but in other countries as well. The Chinese Communist Party right now has many different programs dedicated to this. Among these programs is the 1,000 Talents program, which we've been hearing a lot about. Others are the Torch program, the 973 program, and the 211 program. The Chinese Communist Party basically uses these different titles, these different programs, to go abroad and to recruit individuals to serve the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. It does not necessarily mean individuals recruited through these systems are aware of what they're doing. It could be something as simple, for example, of them shifting their views on China. For the Chinese Communist Party, when it comes to ideological subversion, that is a win, because it means that in their analysis or if they do interviews with media, these academics are promoting the interests of the Chinese Communist Party, knowingly or not. If they can subvert them on a deeper level, it means very likely to get intellectual property, closer ties to the universities, and so on. The Department of Education in the United States is currently investigating issues like this. Now, meanwhile, Australia's spy agency, the Australian Security Intelligence Organization, has submitted a parliamentary inquiry on issues that affect the country's multicultural communities, and it found some governments are looking to interfere in these communities in Australia and to crush dissent as they see it as a threat. Now, it notes that many people have reported being threatened or have family members who have been threatened by their former governments. Now, this report coming out from Australia does not mention China directly, but in context of what's been happening in Australia, this is a big topic because the Chinese Communist Party is being accused right now of using threats and different types of pressure to silence Chinese students studying in Australia. Chinese Communist Party's influence on Australian campuses is one of the big topics there. And now this broader study into how foreign governments are using methods just like this in ethnic communities in Australia is coming out. And also in Australia, its Defense Department is warning of an extreme threat to its shipbuilding plans. This is part of its push to build a stronger navy, again with this Quad alliance against China. And it's saying these spies are highly active to steal the country's military secrets. Now, this report again does not mention China by name, but local reports identified the CCP as the main culprit in operations like this. Now, what is a deeper picture of this? This is an international problem when it comes to the CCP's programs for stealing trade secrets. This is not something limited to Australia. But the fact that it's now being called out and publicly exposed in Australia shows the trajectory of these issues. It is no longer taboo for different officials there to call out the Chinese Communist Party and its influences in the politics and the defense community. In Australia, this has actually been an ongoing thing. Some of the media have been very active on this. And now the intelligence community in Australia is calling this out more directly. And now what's the big picture here as well? The Chinese Communist Party has different campaigns for influence operations and for subversion, and it typically uses the same basic pattern for these operations in just about every country it's involved in. The same methods it uses in Australia are pretty much the same methods it will use in Canada and in the United States. These operations being exposed in one place shine a light on these same operations being carried out by the CCP in other places. And again, we see the Chinese Communist Party being called out for its subversion of college campuses and for its theft of trade secrets. Meanwhile, China's economy is facing crisis from several directions. Several stories point to looming economic troubles for the CCP, which again goes against all the claims of Chinese state media that it was now safe to go and invest in China. Now, the chairman of the China Bank Regulatory Commission, Guo Shuqing, is warning of a potential global financial crisis, and he's blaming the United States for this, saying the U.S. undermined the dollar through its stimulus checks through the Federal Reserve. and for blacklisting Chinese companies and entities. And he also warned that even after the current economic troubles in China caused by numerous black swan events around the same time, the economy is about to be hit even further by bad loans. And it notes that the CCP told lenders to give up to $211 billion in profits to help alleviate pressure on the system. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is attacking the dominance of the US dollar, and it's doing this while looking to create its own new digital currency that it can control fully. The Chinese Communist Party is also warning of a new financial crisis in China, and it's trying to shift blame on this from China to the United States. Now, this is also happening as experts in China are warning that sanctions against Chinese financial institutions could cut them off from global financial systems. They saw this happen to Russia. They think China might be next. This could be the next step in sanctions against the CCP, extending again from party officials and businesses to Chinese banks and financial institutions. Now, the Chinese Communist Party does appear to be preparing for an incident like this, when it allows, for example, news articles to get published in state-run media, when it allows for its different commentators to all align around the same basic narrative. It usually means something bigger is at play. And the Chinese Communist Party does appear to be doing this right now when warning about the possibility of US sanctions that would block its banks and financial institutions from accessing the US dollar. And this is also in addition to new bans on Chinese companies in the supply chain of tech products sold to the US government. Government agencies now going forward are not able to buy electronic equipment if they have Chinese companies in their supply chains. And this is raising problems for the CCP on many different fronts. Now, facing this crisis, the CCP is trying to turn to countries elsewhere. China's telecom company Huawei is allegedly making a new push into Africa, for example. And the CCP is increasing its push to develop ties with governments throughout Latin America as well. Now, what's the bigger picture here? Now, when it comes to the CCP trying to push abroad, there's already a backlash in some of these countries against the CCP. They might have gotten bad loans already. They might have had some of their infrastructure seized by the CCP when they defaulted on those loans. And a lot of them are facing pressure with the CCP in other regards. Now, when it comes to Huawei, for example, the big question will be, can they still sell devices using subpar chips? They got sanctioned by the US and they can no longer develop current generation technologies, at least when it comes to their smartphones. And the big thing with the CCP's markets is they need expansion, but they've already been exploiting different countries as much as they possibly can. If you've been exploiting everything, and your growth model is based on that exploitation, whether it's economic theft, whether it's debt traps, whether it's different, say, underhanded means to steal technology and so on, and suddenly all those capabilities are taken away, then what you're left with is the shell of the system you once had. The Chinese Communist Party is being forced right now to compete on fair ground with other countries. And now that they're being forced to do so, it means they've lost all that buffer space. It means that all the weight, all of these, say, programs for global expansion, all of that is contracting, not expanding. And on top of all of this, Trump has ordered TikTok's parent company ByteDance to sell its US assets and is authorizing now a full audit. Now, the audit of ByteDance is a looming black swan event, not just for TikTok, but for Chinese companies overall. If the US comes out and exposes serious wrongdoing of some kind, it won't just hit TikTok. It won't just reflect on ByteDance. It will reflect on every Chinese tech company, because the picture will be not just on the companies, but on the hand the Chinese Communist Party plays in them. And so what's the bigger picture here? The CCP's economy is being hit from all directions, internally and externally. One problem with exploitation and economic theft, again, is that the CCP's growth model was based on this. And if this growth model is now pulled out from under the CCP and it's forced to play by the rules, it means this bubble risks bursting. Now, with that said, folks, we're broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And also, if you want to support us, please join us on Patreon. You can find the link to that in the description below. If you haven't already, please also don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel grow. If you want to go the extra mile, again, please tell a friend or family member about Crossroads. Again, it really helps us. Now, with that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.